What you are about to hear is profoundly disturbing and deeply heartbreaking. This story is one of the most horrific and devastating tragedies ever to unfold. Even the strongest among you may struggle to hold back tears as you learn about the unimaginable suffering of a small, helpless child. This is not just a story. It's a wake-up call, a haunting reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the dangers of societal indifference. It's a tale that demands to be heard, no matter how painful, to ensure such horrors are never forgotten. What began as a Cinderella-like fairy tale swiftly turned into an unthinkable nightmare. Elisa, a sweet and radiant little girl with a smile that could brighten any room, was cherished by her loving father. To him, she was his princess, and he devoted himself to giving her a life full of love and joy. But tragedy struck, cruelly tearing him away from her. With her father gone, Elisa's once magical life spiraled into a harrowing nightmare. She was thrust into the hands of a monster, forced to endure horrors no child should ever face. This is the story of Elisa Izquierdo, a child whose innocence was stolen, a victim of unimaginable cruelty, and a society that turned its back when she needed it most. Elisa was born on February 11, 1989, at Woodhull Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. From her very first breath, her father showered her with love, but the shadow of tragedy loomed closer than anyone could have imagined. Elisa's story begins even before her birth, with the intertwined lives of her parents, Gustavo Izquierdo and Awilda Lopez. Their paths first crossed at a homeless shelter in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, 2 years before Elisa was born. Gustavo, a Cuban immigrant, worked part-time at the shelter as a cleaner and caterer, while nurturing dreams of becoming a dance teacher in America. Awilda, of Puerto Rican descent, was a temporary resident there, having been evicted from her apartment due to unpaid rent, a consequence of her ongoing struggle with substance abuse. Awilda was already a mother to 2 children, Rubencino and Casey, from a previous relationship with Ruben Rivera. Her dependency on prohibited substances had led to the loss of custody of her older children, who were placed with her family in January 1989. When Gustavo discovered that Awilda was using drugs during her pregnancy with Elisa, he made the difficult decision to end their relationship. He was devastated, but determined to protect his unborn child from further harm. Elisa entered the world already dependent on the substances her mother had abused during pregnancy. The situation was so dire that social workers immediately notified the city's Child Welfare Administration. Recognizing Awilda's inability to care for her daughter, authorities awarded full custody of Elisa to Gustavo. Despite having no prior parenting experience, Gustavo proved to be an extraordinary father. He embraced the challenges of single parenthood with unwavering love and dedication, determined to give Elisa the life she deserved. On a cold November night in 1995, Elisa Izquierdo's unimaginable suffering came to a tragic and horrifying end. Her mother, Awilda Lopez, in a fit of rage, slammed Elisa's head against a concrete wall with full force. The impact was so severe that it caused a fatal brain hemorrhage. The aftermath of this horrific act is chilling. One of Awilda's sisters recalled a disturbing phone call she received that night. She told me Elisa was lying on the bed like a retard, not eating, drinking, or going to the bathroom. I told her to take Elisa to the hospital and I would take care of the other children. Awilda's reply was as cold as it was incomprehensible. She said she'd think about it after doing the dishes. By the next day, Elisa's tiny, lifeless body lay cold on the bed. Seeking confirmation of her condition, Awilda invited a neighbor to look at her daughter. The neighbor's horror grew as he realized Elisa was already gone. Brain fluid was leaking from the child's nose, a haunting sign of the fatal injury she had sustained. For 2 hours, the neighbor pleaded with Awilda to call the police, but she refused. Unable to stand by any longer, he made the call himself. As soon as the authorities were alerted, Awilda attempted to flee to the roof, intending to end her own life. However, she was restrained before she could follow through. When police officers arrived, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. They later reported that there was not a single unmarked spot on Elisas's fragile body. Every inch was covered in bruises and cuts, evidence of the prolonged and unrelenting abuse she had endured. What authorities discovered inside the home that day is something they said they would never forget. Elisa's small body bore over 30 circular marks, initially thought to be cigarette burns. However, investigators later determined these were impressions from the stone of someone's ring, a cruel detail that underscored the brutality of her abuse. After her arrest, Awilda Lopez initially confessed to throwing Elisa headfirst into a concrete wall 2 days before calling the neighbor for help. She admitted that Elisa had been unable to speak or walk after the assault, but took no action to seek medical care. The autopsy revealed an appalling litany of injuries: broken fingers, with one bone protruding through the skin, a broken toe, severe internal organ damage, and deep welts and burns across her head, face, and body. Adding to the horror, Elisa's genitals and rectum showed signs of trauma, including tearing. Forensic evidence confirmed that many of these injuries had been inflicted over an extended period, painting a picture of prolonged and systemic abuse. On June 25, 1996, Awilda Lopez pleaded guilty to second-degree murder before Judge Alvin Schlesinger at the New York State Supreme Court. Her attorney, Daniel Olin, advised her to accept a plea deal, which included eligibility for parole after serving 15 years. The following month, Judge Schlesinger sentenced Lopez to 15 years to life in prison. Before delivering the formal sentencing, Judge Schlesinger did not hold back his condemnation of the system that had failed Elisa so profoundly. He remarked, "We have not created procedures to do everything necessary to protect the young and vulnerable in our society. The system has failed to protect our babies, and don't tell me how much it costs." These words echoed the public's outrage and sorrow, sparking intense scrutiny of New York's child welfare policies. The tragedy of Elisa Izquierdo became a rallying cry for systemic reform, though for many, the change came far too late. "If anything good can come from this horrendous tragedy," Judge Schlesinger remarked, "it will be that we give priority to these babies." Despite the severity of her crimes, Awilda Lopez became eligible for parole in 2010. She was denied release multiple times, most recently in January 2022. However, on April 19, 2022, she was released from the medium-security Taconic Correctional Facility, sparking outrage and heartbreak among those who remembered Elisa Izquierdo and the unimaginable suffering she endured. Elisa's small body was laid to rest at Cypress Hills Cemetery in Queens, New York. Her funeral was a somber and heart-wrenching affair. Relatives, loved ones, and strangers deeply moved by her story filled her casket with photographs, flowers, and stuffed animals, a symbolic gesture of the love and care she never received in life. Even the funeral could not erase the visible scars of her suffering. Despite the undertaker's efforts, the makeup could not fully conceal the terrible injuries Elisa had endured during her short and tragic life. In a cruel twist, the court granted Awilda Lopez the rights to Elisa's remains. This bitter end to an already devastating tragedy meant that, even in death, Elisa was denied the opportunity to be reunited with her beloved father, Gustavo, who had loved her so deeply and fought so hard to protect her. Elisa Izquierdo's life ended tragically, but her story remains a haunting reminder of the failures of a system meant to protect the most vulnerable. She became a symbol of the urgent need for reform and a heartbreaking testament to the importance of vigilance, compassion, and accountability in safeguarding children. Reverend Gianni Agostinelli addressed mourners with powerful words. Elisa was killed not only by the hand of a sick person, but also by the powerlessness of the silence of many, the negligence of child protection institutions, and the moral mediocrity that has poisoned our neighborhoods. He called for accountability, stating that those in positions of power, including Mayor Giuliani and others responsible at the time, had failed Elisa by dismantling and inadequately rebuilding the child welfare system meant to protect vulnerable children. Reverend Agostinelli's message was clear. While reforms were promised, the system remains deeply flawed, and in some ways, the problem has only worsened. By releasing this video, I aim to raise awareness and encourage people to act and speak up when they witness signs of abuse or neglect. Elisa's death was preventable. She wasn't just failed by one person, but by the silence and inaction of many, the failure of institutions, and a society that allowed her suffering to continue unnoticed. We are surrounded by warning signs, yet too often, they are ignored. Nothing is more painful than realizing you could have helped someone, especially a helpless child, but didn't act. How many more tragedies like Elisa's must occur before we recognize that our current methods are not working? I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below and help spread this video to bring more attention to Elisa's tragic story. Together, we can demand accountability, raise awareness, and push for meaningful change to protect other children from similar fates. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel for more stories that confront difficult but necessary truths. Let's remember that behind every story like this are real people, real children who are suffering. Always be vigilant, stay aware of your surroundings, and, above all, protect your children.